May 22nd. I'm delighted to meet you here. Grab a coffee and let's get smarter together. Planaria, flatworms, have made it recently into the news because a certain poisonous type with a head shaped like a triangle has invaded the US. These worms have incredible regenerative abilities. You cut them in half and about 8 days later every piece starts to regrow what it is missing to be a full worm again. Yes, as of the head, including the brain. That's how sexless planaria reproduce. They literally rip themselves apart and become two. Which one is the continuation of the original? Your guess is as good as mine, since both parts will now everything the single planarian has learned before, it's impossible to tell. Fact is, though, there's a continuation since the beginning of the species, a version of immortality. And that means that their DNA is a mess, a total mess. Yet there's no indication that they care whatsoever. Whatever message is encoded, the result is a normal planarian, which is totally cancer resistant and doesn't age. What does it tell us? Well, let's compare it to computing to illustrate the point. When you write code, you will not give a single thought to what might happen if a ship goes faulty, or the like, what might result in the infidelity of your information. You simply assume information fidelity is a given because the environment in which you move is built that way. Now look at nature. In nature, everything down to the substrate is changing constantly. And that's not just true outside the organism, but at it inside as well. Proteins degrade. Cells die and are replaced, or not. Mutations happen. And so on and so on. Any plan built on the assumption that even just in one tiny corner things will remain as they are for any stretch of time can be fatally flawed. The architecture that will survive such conditions is an architecture that assumes that it exists in a complex system in which everything is a variable. For such an architecture, training and priors is absolute circumstantial. It can't assume that the future will look like anything like the past, what any of the available data means, or that always the same cocktail of data picked from the plethora that is available will be helpful. It will act on the fly, interpret information to get the most out of it, and deal with whatever comes its way. Result-orientated and flexible, so that at the end, we end up with a planarian under any conditions. It's a real-time sense-making process in which the self is an error corrector, because the target state is constantly moving ahead, forcing the organism to transform into whatever the next form is supposed to be, rinse and repeat. But to correct errors, you first need to find them. And because everything changes, they could be literally everywhere. A random search is therefore needed, and it will promise the highest payoff. Metabolic and timely restraints, however, make it impossible to check everything everywhere all at once. They require us to be selective with what we pay attention to be detail-orientated, to still get as closely as possible to the conditions of a random search, the selection of data we pay attention to, which we use to generate a current model of the world and self, must change as often as possible, therefore. Since randomization of a search is that basic and important to survival, it must have an enforcement mechanism that trains the organism to seek out the switch. Triggers must be everywhere. Finding them must be rewarded. Exploration must be supported via risk mitigation. And that's what consciousness, dopamine, and mirroring are for. When we don't explore enough, a lack of dopamine tells us that we are playing with fire and risk our survival since we don't do enough to transform and make us fit for whatever changing conditions inside and outside of the organism exist. When the situation continues, we get sick, mentally and physically. So break out of routines and standards, search for new sensations, explore as the nanas think. Make a habit out of thinking. Let's turn thinking into a movement. Like, comment, share and follow, lest you might miss a single opportunity to improve yourself and society. Once you do, we'll meet again at the coffee pot.